Military tensions are escalating globally with new headlines out regarding Iran and Hezbollah, which is out of Lebanon. Well, Iran's saying the time is up to Israel. You guys better not mess around. Hezbollah is saying they are stronger than ever. The USA better watch out. There's a new alert from the State Department warning Americans worldwide to be careful. We are back with Beyond the Surface. I'm Ivory Hecker.
And I'm Elizabeth Lane. Yes, Ivory, things are escalating all over the world. I feel like, I don't know, do you remember any year, like since you were born, that everything just hit us at the same time? War after war, conflict after conflict, then some aliens, everything at the same time. It's incredible. But yeah, this is serious though. Now, Iran is getting involved, which was not the case just even a few days ago.
I have a little clip from Fox News about this.
Yeah.
Here it is.
New worries the Hamas-Israel war could be spreading to multiple fronts after Iran's embassy in Syria said that time is up for Israel. The warning following Iran's foreign minister declaring other fronts will open if Israel does not stop what he calls crimes against Palestinians.
I think that's not just crimes against Palestinians, but crimes against humanity. Because here's the thing, I've been a subject to a lot of controversy on my own Substack and channel because people really don't understand, because everyone is approaching this very emotionally, right? So they see Hamas bombing Israel and these terrible, terrible videos, some of them fake, some of them real. I'm not saying that, I'm not going lightly on casualties that Israel took, but we have to understand what's really going on behind the scenes. We can't just look at a bloody picture of dead bodies and be like, oh my God, this is terrible, kill Hamas, destroy that. See, this is what they want. They want the division between society without understanding what have happened before in history, what's going on. I don't want to be a defender of Hamas, like I said, and I keep repeating myself that I'm not on the Israeli side and I'm not on the Palestinian side. I'm certainly not on the side of Hamas. So, but I do understand something, that before we ever got here, there was years and years of pressure and terrible conditions that Palestinians lived in. And I always have these discussions with Congress people, especially the warmongers who are pushing for war right now to get Egypt involved in this and Iran involved in this and so on. Their argument is, well, why did they start the war? Why did they attack? Well, what do you do when you are not heard for years and years? Me and you don't have kids, but people who do, they will understand this better. So anyone that ever has visited or been to Gaza, they know that if you're born in Gaza, you're kind of born dead. The living conditions are incredible there. It's like living like animals, Wow. So people just had it. And what do? If you know that you have very little chances of making it to 30 if you're born in Gaza, right? You're already dead. There's no way you can ever have a normal job. Like, you have to literally think about food every week. What are you gonna eat? What are you gonna feed your kids? So if that's the living conditions for you, and then, I will always compare it to, have you ever heard of a case of Andres Breivik? So Andres Breivik was this crazy person, psychopath who killed a bunch of kids on Toya. And he's sitting in prison in Europe, and he's in way better conditions than many Americans are in their usual lives. And then we have people in Gaza who hunt for food, literally. And compared to this criminal that killed like 60-something kids, it's unfair at very least. Maybe I'm a little bit more violent person than most, but if I know that my kid is about to die before he gets 30 because of the living conditions that we live in, I don't care if I die fighting or I die sitting. And that is the choice that Hamas made. They're like, well, we're going to die anyway. Like, we are treated as corpses, as dead people anyway. So why don't we die fighting? And this is the problem that people don't understand. Then another thing here is the origins of Hamas, right? So who created Hamas? Where was this, like, where are they getting the funding from?
The sponsor of my coverage. The U.S. debt spike could ignite a long-term rally in gold. Since March of 2020, the U.S. added another $8 trillion in debt, and gold is up 50%. Now, with the Fed raising rates, the interest payment on our debt has surpassed $1 trillion annually. BRICS nations met last month, and oil-rich nations Saudi Arabia and the UAE have joined Russia, China, and India. 51% of Americans can't pay their credit card bills, which just surpassed $1 trillion for the first time in history. If this is Build Back Better, increased spending and regulation is likely to continue, with Yellen saying now that we can still afford to pay for 2 more wars. Buying gold and silver is a strategic play that several countries are doing today. Who's looking out for the little guy when the government doesn't? Isn't it time that you look at gold and silver? Call America's own precious metals company, National Gold Group. Check it out in my description. You'll always get best in class service from America's conservative precious metals leader. Mention my channel, Ivory Hecker. National Gold Group has a free IRA fee waiver program on qualifying rollovers. Call 888-617-5927. Get a free investor guide in my description. National Gold Group is a consumer affairs top rated gold IRA dealer. 888-617-5927. Remember, there's always a risk of loss. Past performance is not indicative of future results.
Right? And if you go way back, and I think we have a clip for this where
Ron Paul, right?
Yes, Ron Paul explains.
This is a crazy clip about America's role in both sides of Hamas and Israel. Here it is.
In many ways, what's happening in the Middle East, and in particular with Gaza right now, we have some moral responsibility for both sides in a way, because we provide help and funding for both Arab nations and Israel. And so we definitely have a moral responsibility, and especially now today, the weapons being used to kill so many Palestinians are American weapons, and American funds essentially are being used for this. But there's a political liability, which I think is something that we fail to look at, because too often there's so much blowback from our intervention in areas that we shouldn't be involved in. You know, Hamas, if you look at the history, you'll find out that Hamas was encouraged and really started by Israel, because they wanted Hamas to counteract Yasser Arafat. And you say, well, yeah, that was better then and served its purpose, but we didn't want Hamas to do this. So then we as Americans say, well, we have such a good system, we're going to impose this on the world. We're going to invade Iraq and teach people how to be Democrats. We want free elections. So we encourage the Palestinians to have a free election. They do, and they elect Hamas. So we first indirectly and directly through Israel help establish Hamas. Then we have election. Then Hamas becomes dominant, so we have to kill them. You know, it just doesn't make sense.
Yes. Wow. He's absolutely right there. And Yasser Arafat, I'm not going to go into his history, but was saved by the Americans. You would think that if we are such a good ally with Israel and we pledge our allegiance to Israel, which is completely, I don't understand why, but let's say we do, we just like them so much, right? Then why are we saving their enemies? Why are we funding their enemies? Which is Yasser Arafat has his back against the wall in Libya, and we were the ones who saved him, you know? Because let me explain what's going on. This is very small amount of very powerful individuals who are trying to control every conflict. They saved Yasser Arafat because it was not time for Israel to take over. They wanted to control the conflict. And we're going back to the globalist agenda. This is what people don't get. And some Israelis do get it. You will see lots of Jews, lots of even Israelis who are actually pro-Palestinian rights, because they understand that they are being played by the government of the United States and Israel. So this is why I say stop this division, people. Like, I'm pro-Israeli, I'm pro-Palestinian. Be pro-people and understand that very little amount of individuals on top are playing everyone, including Jews and Palestinians, because there is no other explanation. Why would they fund both sides to attack each other? Because they like this. They get to consolidate power like this. They get to make a lot of money, you know? So there's a lot that goes on down the, you know, this conflict. So because we don't have time to cover everything deep, like go very, very deep and cover everything, my suggestion to everyone out there would be less emotions, stay with each other, understand that Palestinians and Israelis are the same people. They both want to be free. They both want the same things for their families. So maybe look at the small, very powerful elements on top and what is their agenda, you know?
Right. Well, speaking of America funding both sides, U.S. Biden is pushing for Congress to send $100 million over to the Middle East, to Israel, but also actually the majority of that money he still wants to send to Ukraine because things are popping off in Ukraine. We have this headline from Reuters: U.S. decision to send long-range missiles to Kiev was a grave mistake, says the Russian envoy. Washington's decision to send long-range missiles to Ukraine they'll have serious consequences, Reuters reports. Russia's ambassador to the U.S. said on Wednesday, after Kiev said that it used the weapons for the first time. Kiev is saying that they made serious damage. They created serious damage in Russia thanks to American missiles. Let me just show that headline from the Kiev Post before I get your take. It says, aftermath of Ukraine's devastating strike on this airfield revealed in satellite photos. So Kiev is putting out this before and after satellite photo, and they're saying there's serious damage that you can see before and after. Now, I'm actually not seeing any craters there, so I'm not sure. What's your take?
No, Reuters, I don't want to diss Reuters at all. They actually been doing a really good work in different parts of the world, but this is nothing. You understand? Like, this for Russians, this is nothing compared to where we are with Israeli-Palestine conflict right now. This is not something that I would concern myself if I was Russian. The 1% in charge of this whole thing. But of course, the act itself, sending Ukraine long-range missiles that they said a million times they would not, right, is already an escalation of war on the other side when you have Israeli-Palestine conflict here to deal with, right? Why are you doing that? This is the real question that you need to ask. Why would we do that? What's the point? We know that Ukraine lost. They admitted a million times on air that, yes, we are losing the war. There is nothing left, right? Why would you not go for peace there? Why would you want to escalate even farther when Russia said that, hey, long-range missiles, more of this flow of this type of technology, and this is it. Like, we're gonna end this really badly. So why do you think they are doing this? Do they want the world conflict? Like, I want your opinion about this.
It seems like they do, especially when our Treasury Secretary is saying, oh, yeah, we can totally afford 2 wars, to fund 2 wars.
Absolute bullshit. But
yeah. I don't know how that works, how it benefits. It must benefit people at the top. But it seems that everyone's pushing each other's buttons. I don't know why, and I wish it would stop. And I think that a lot of people are just calling, they just want peace and no hurting on any sides. And we don't understand why our leaders want to kill innocent people in foreign countries. But yeah, the Russian ambassador said, quote, the consequences of this step from Ukraine, sending American missiles into Russia, he says it was deliberately hidden from the public and the consequences will be the most serious nature. So.
Absolutely. And Ivory, Tucker actually said why. Like, I think Tucker was very right when he said because they simply cannot lose. They can't lose these conflicts because they are done. The 1% in America, their economy is going over the cliff with the BRICS, and they just cannot afford to lose. And Tucker warned us that what they intend to do is eventually go to war with Russia, because they can't afford to lose. The game is over for them if they lose, So I think he made a really good predictions, because everything that the US has done suggests that he was right. So I think what we need to do, bring in Mike Jones, a British journalist who's in Russia, actually in Donbass right now, on the front lines, and update us with the situation to what's going on after this huge escalation with the long-range missiles. We have Mike Jones here. Excuse my hair. What happened? So we have Mike Jones, British journalist who's been covering Russia.
I have that effect on women, I'm afraid.
We must be low on sleepers.
I think we're good. Yeah, we have Mike Jones.
Who? Mike Jones!
No, Mike Jones is very popular in Houston.
All yours up together.
I moved to Russia in 2018, around about the start of the special military operation. On my lunch break from work, I just started covering the news headlines and just comparing the two. And then I had a big YouTube channel, and then YouTube just nuked me completely.
Wow.
The US State Department just completely wiped me out. And that was after I came to Donbass and started delivering presents to kids at like Christmas time and taking humanitarian aid, and that was just unacceptable. So I got.
Oh, wow. So you're an independent journalist, but you don't have like a journalism background, but you just kind of
No, definitely not.
You're actually showing. Oh, wow. And you think
Yeah, I was actually just pointing at the camera.
you think the State Department took you out?
I'm
YouTube?
90% sure. Yeah, NewsGuard released a hit piece, and NewsGuard are a front company for the US State Department. Graham Phillips, in his court case as well, in his lawyers suing, they've uncovered the links and traces for the UK government lobbying for YouTube to delete him, and probably me as well as a British citizen. And I've had people who visited me in Russia then get interrogated by the FBI regarding my circumstances, what entry routes I use into Donbass, how I pay money to the UK, and it's like,
And this is just for showcasing information on what's happening on both sides?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah, this happens a lot. And you know what's crazy? Mike might not be somebody like Anderson Cooper, who started, his career a million years ago in journalism, stuck to it. But this is actually a very good thing that I want to mention. I meet journalists, I call them leverets, who just sit there and read the fake news, right? Versus what Mike has become in a very short period of time. Like every time he talks about Russia, he can take on any CNN journalist that I know of and win the argument because of what he knows, because of what he experienced. And this is like firsthand knowledge of what he's doing in Russia. And I can't wait to kind of interview him.
Authenticity. Check out these Soviet curtains.
Soviet curtains.
Yeah,
I am not familiar with Soviet curtains. How are they?
I don't know.
Soviet?
These are like 1970. This is a Soviet cupboard, though.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's
So
Donbass, baby.
Oh, in Donbass. Wow.
Yeah, well, Lugansk. Yeah.
Which, for people, I'm sure most people have been paying attention, but yeah, that is the war zone. That's kind of, Donbass is the whole reason everything escalated between Russia and Ukraine.
Okay.
What is your take, Mike, on these American missiles? Reuters is reporting that Ukraine is now fired at Russia.
The first reports were these missiles were delivered a long time ago, and we've seen that with many weapon systems that are promised. We will send these. We already know, and the Russian intelligence already knew that they had been delivered. We saw it with the depleted uranium ammunition from the UK, and that got blown up in a warehouse shortly after. So the ATACMS missiles were known to be on the territory of Ukraine. To see them employed, the West got through on that one. I was reading an article just today from one of the air defense platoons, the commanders, who was saying same with Storm Shadow / Scalp missiles. It took a couple, they got through, but it doesn't take more than a few before the S-300, S-400 systems can catch up and learn their trajectories, their paths. Even those JDAM bombs as well, they've learned to adapt to those. So they've been assuring, certainly the Russian population, that give us a little while to either capture the actual munition, which they did in the case of the Storm Shadow, and reverse engineer, or just adapt to the tactics before they can counter them. So this case with Berdyansk airport, airfield that you talked about, I didn't really see any catastrophic damage. there. I think the main victory is that, oh, look, we struck an airfield, as they did with Pskov airfield as well, through these drones, maybe not, maybe from Estonia or somewhere else. So they have these tiny little pinprick victories. Look, we shattered a window in Moscow from a drone that got through, and they make a big hullabaloo about it. But the actual real world implication is minimal at best, and it doesn't. That's the key thing. It doesn't affect the front line or the war effort and on the ground at all. It's just a PR victory at the end of the day.
Well, he has to now. We heard Zelensky once the aid to Israel started coming up as the main subject. Zelensky kind of stuck his head out and said, "What about me?" So like we heard that he wants to get more attention because he knows that West is completely and utterly directed towards Israel right now, and they know they're losing war in Ukraine, and Zelensky's trying the best he can to keep the money flowing.
Mike,
Yeah.
what brought you to Donbass? Why are you there right now?
It started from actually it was criticism on a video I did where I absolutely battered the people that ran away from mobilization back this time last year in September. The Russians that fled through fear of mobilization. I said, that's disgusting, you traitors. Good riddance to you. Because if you can't answer the call to protect the society that you live in and your families, then Russia doesn't need you nor want you. And if I had the call, I would answer it. And people rightly said, but you're a British citizen, so you're never going to receive the call, certainly not from the Russian Federation or until you become a Russian citizen. So I said, well, fine, I'll mobilize myself. So then I traveled to Donbass. I intended to buy a Buhanka, but when I told my story to a friend of mine, he just gave me one. He gave me a brand new, it's a Soviet-designed four-wheel drive van. It's very, very rugged, very agricultural. It's definitely not built for comfort. But we filled it up with supplies from Moscow and we took it down around 5th of November last year was the first run. And I've been doing it every month since. And now this time we're taking stretchers to some of the frontline units and some heaters to Mariupol and various humanitarian aid. So that's primarily why I was here in Donbass. And my focus was not to feed the war machine, to feed the misery and suffering, but rather to try and alleviate it as best I could.
That's awesome. Hey, Mike, so I kind of want to get into nitty gritty. What do you think? Let's look at the bigger picture. While people are dissecting the leaves of the trees, right? Let's get to the root. So we know, and this is long time it was a private knowledge, but now it's a public knowledge that you see these generals talking about this all over social media, that the plan a long time ago was to attack 7 different Middle Eastern countries, and by attack means you know what I'm talking about. So they wanted to start in so Iraq, Afghanistan, but the thing is the West wanted to end this in Iran because former CIA John Kiriakou said during the briefing, he heard that we have 7 different countries and we're going to end in Tehran. And he actually reached out to his superior and he said, did I misheard them? Like, did I say Tehran? And he was like, yeah, they've lost their minds. Like, this was a plan, okay? CIA doesn't do a week or 2 weeks or a month planning. They do years. And that's the game of intelligence, right? So what do you think? Do you think we are at the end of this phase of messing up entire Middle East and finally they are about to get Iran into this conflict by provocating? We now learned from this video that Hamas actually was fed by Israel itself to counter Arafat. And now they use the monster they created to attack Israeli people, sacrifice some of the Israelis for a bigger purpose, to maybe cleanse entire Gaza from Palestine. What is your take on it? Because this is where I stand. Like, this seems to me that they are still carrying out the same plan they had so many years ago.
It could well be, and how much that plan has deviated, of course, we don't know. But I think you're referring to a speech that was something like 7 wars in 7 years, or
exactly. That's the briefing I'm referring to. Yep.
Yeah, I think
Which
even
they delivered
somewhere as well.
They delivered on it. They just messed up Syria because of Russia, and they couldn't forgive Russia. The same thing. Like, Russia was the reason they could not orchestrate regime change in Syria. So then they realized that Russia is the problem, and they have to get rid of Russia because Russia's aiding Syria. And there you go, Ukrainian war right here. And once Ukrainian war is sizzling, we are back to the same plan, or at least seems like it. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, that may have been the plan, but I think some people are realizing that Iran isn't what it was years ago and has actually become quite a formidable force in the Middle East. I'm not an expert on it. Actually, it's somewhere I've actually wanted to go, but I have to wait till I get a Russian passport because a British one, the bureaucracy to get there is horrendous. But for Russians, it's very easy to get to Iran and Tehran. And I'd like to find out more about the people before, and their society, before I were to pass judgment or make those sort of things, recommendations about them. But suffice to say, from what we're seeing in the geopolitics and some of the speeches that are coming out, Iran is clearly a major player in the Arab world, with now Saudi Arabia even keeping Blinken overnight waiting, which is really disrespectful in that part of the world. That's a real big slight that can't be overlooked.
Absolutely.
So there's this shift of attitude and opinions over in that part of the world that's really there's going against the US. But one interesting opinion that I read was that no one wants to strike first. They're waiting for Israel to be the one that triggers it. Now, whether that ground invasion of Gaza is enough for Iran, for instance, to, as they're warning, a preemptive strike, or Hezbollah from the north to come down and open a second front, remains to be seen. But you guys were talking about earlier about the children, the casualties in Palestine. It's a stated Israeli protocol to mow the grass, and that has been since, I believe, 2006. Where if there's any form of attack from Hamas, they will mow the grass. And of course, when you mow the grass, usually that's quite young, so that means everyone, children included, and that's a stated aim Israeli policy. And then we're seeing these double standards that come out in the news. So if Russia just bombs one electrical substation in Ukraine just before last winter, Ursula von der Leyen is categorically saying that's a war crime. Israel does it, and we don't know, we need an investigation, or Israel has the right to defend itself. The hypocrisy, certainly, from all this, and even the case of this latest hospital, we need an investigation. One missile lands in Kramatorsk, Russia did it. Straight. We haven't even seen the wreckage yet. We just got this photo that looks like something. Definitely Russia did it. And then later the investigation comes and Reuters might go, yeah, actually Ukraine fired that, but we won't correct the original record. So there's this huge double standard hypocrisy going on. If we look at the US Capitol, just recently, these protests going to the US Capitol building, now Trump Jr. is coming out and saying, wait, if the Democrats do it, it's social justice and fine. But if anyone else does it, then it's insurrection and the double standards of the US justice system. We have all these rules being bent in favor of the state of Israel. I'm not going to say Jews. I'm not going to say the Israeli people, because it's not.
Yeah, it's state of Israel. Jews are actually protecting their rights and Palestinian rights. Jews are standing against this. So let's not get all Jews involved. Right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, this is where I don't like where people use blanket terms and say Palestinians. Palestinians doesn't mean Hamas, and vice versa. And equally, Jews doesn't mean Israel, and all those connotations and all that. But you've got to call it for what it actually is. And particularly if you say Zionists as well, because there were Zionists in Ukraine. And that is partly why Bandera sided with.
Can you explain again what a Zionist is?
So a Zionist essentially is this philosophy of like this homeland, and it's going to be of pure people a certain way. But certainly Zionism is like, this is
it's a radical Jewish, but not necessarily. You don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist. So
no, this is what I mean. Certainly in the case of Ukraine, this was a Zion for Slavs, pure Slavs, true Slavs. Mm-hmm. Russians are not true, they're not pure, so they need to be slaughtered and eradicated from the earth. This was the sort of Bandera Zionism that was being propagated around there. Alexei Arestovich was one of the big proponents of that, claiming that Ukraine was a Zion for the Slavs. And then we have the state of Israel for Jews. And it's the irony is not lost on me that Zelensky is a Jew and was denied entry to Israel recently.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize
Well, he
that.
just has to wait. He wasn't necessarily now is not a right time. Really? Oh, okay.
Wait, does this tie in with Kanye saying that black people are the original Jews?
Oh man! Wow, I don't even.
I have
go
not
into
heard
what
of that.
Yeah,
He said that.
I am Jew.
He did.
That's a can of worms. No, not for me. Okay. Well outside of my expertise. But I also don't like to draw too many parallels between the situation in the Middle East and Ukraine and Donbass. I have alluded to it in some other interviews and videos whereby you have certainly in the case of the Palestinians, specifically in the Gaza Strip in particular, where they are in an open air concentration camp now, where they've been herded and then kept under these fences, where you have a people who seek to have an autonomous state. They at least want recognition as an independent state, similar to the Donbass republics of Lugansk and Donetsk, where they realize that, okay, Ukraine, you're bombing your own citizens, so just agree to call us an autonomous state. Oh, you won't do that? Fine, we'll join Russia. So there are these levels, as Elizabeth alluded to, where of frustration and desperation. And of course, now we're seeing Hamas, which has its origins also in the Muslim Brotherhood from Egypt, set up by the British.
True. And this is go on.
No, yeah, saying so the British set up these entities as well, and it's not just been there. We've seen this playbook played out multiple times in history, where you have this force to justify having a military presence of the imperial or colonial power. So, we're fighting
that Osama bin Laden. Yeah, exactly. Osama bin Laden was working for the CIA. Like,
absolutely, that's pretty much common knowledge now, I think, and people should see that. That's Osama bin Laden, former CIA. I think Saddam Hussein had CIA connections, or
John Nixon, CIA agent, told me this on my podcast. Like, he flat out said that Saddam Hussein was our man. Period.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the podcast that YouTube got rid of?
Yep, that's the podcast that they deleted, because I mean, what do you do, Ivory, when you have a CIA officer who you Google John Nixon, and the first thing that it shows like 20-something years in CIA, right? So what they gonna do? They cannot disclaim that, like, oh, John never worked in the CIA. Yes, he did. He's all over the CNN and all the other news, right? So this man says that the Hussein was our man in the beginning, you know? So so that's the thing. Like, of course they have
same playbook.
Same playbook, exact same thing.
As Ivory said, I think Hamas was set to, it was actually to split from the PLO, which was Yasser Arafat. So create another opposition to the opposition, to divide and conquer and keep the Palestinians fighting among themselves. But then, as Ron Paul said, well, wait, what? They then were like, okay, no, let's have Hamas. Let's have Hamas as a majority. And then we've got these problems now. So this is the divide and conquer that's kind of gone a little bit wrong. But then I feel it's now serving other agendas. There have been a lot of questions that have been drawn as to how this took place. The Egyptians saying, we warned you. Israel saying, no, you didn't. And I think all of that's a distraction. One of the key points here is Biden landed in Israel, but Putin landed in China. So whilst all eyes are that way, something's going on over there. And I think that's going to be quite important in the coming days. And Iran, certainly BRICS, actually, if we see the caliber of diplomat and politician, you've got the EU virtue signaling, I stand with Israel, flying in. Let's have more war, like Annalena Baerbock. Yeah, sure. Have lots of weapons, all the weapons you can use to kill anybody you like, and we don't care where the weapons go. Whereas China and Russia are saying, well, why don't we have peace? Recognize them as an independent state. Let's actually enforce the UN resolutions that already existed, that already passed, that no one bothered. Similar to Minsk 1 and 2. We already had these agreements that no one enforced, that even the guarantors, as Angela Merkel confessed later on, it was just the right time for another agenda to get at Russia. It's a similar playbook happening in the Middle East, and same with the propaganda as well. We've had similar sort of flip round of lies and things just turned on their heads straight away to serve the agenda. And then, as I've already talked about, the hypocrisy that comes out even on the top level. And now we're having insurrection in the EU where their own diplomats are like, wait, how can you not say this is a war crime? How can you say you support Israel? Claire Daly then calling for the resignation of Ursula von der Leyen, saying actually she's unelected. And how does she speak for foreign policy for the EU from that position? So how can she say the EU supports Israel? She literally can't. It's not in her job remit. It's not in her power to do so. And even Josep Borrell going, yeah, actually, what is she talking about?
Well, here's the thing. We know who's bought by the West. When they come out and do that, they are pretty much exposing themselves like, hey, it doesn't matter what's going on, right? Like my donors are telling me this is what I need to do, so this is what's going to happen. I can't name the name of this person. I wish I could, but then I will break all the trust that I have left with this
Just
person.
do what Reuters does, and an anonymous source close to the matter.
Yeah, anonymous source close to the matter that sits in Congress in the US told me something at 3 a.m. at night. So here it is. He texted something interesting. He said, well, you know, pretty much like Israeli will destroy the Palestine, I mean Gaza and Palestinian people in Gaza, but they shouldn't have started the war. And what they are doing, he says, and I want to hear both of your opinions, what they're doing is they are hiding, Hamas is hiding behind innocent civilians. So I did not answer to that, because if I had if I answered, then I had to go in like this freaking Bible of like what's really going on. So he got mad and he's like, stand your ground. You don't answer? Like you have no answer on that? And I was like, okay, you know what? You're asking for it, bro. So I said, when Ukrainian soldiers in Donbass hid behind the citizens underneath the buildings and the buildings had to get bombed because they were there, then it was okay by you, right? Because he was one of the biggest warmongers sending weapons to Ukraine. So that's okay if Ukraine hides behind, because the justification is, oh, Ukraine is weak. Guess what? Hamas is way weaker than Israel with the American military backing Israel. So the only thing they can do is take hostages and say, stop bombing or your hostages die. As simple as that, you know? So it's done out of weak position, desperate position to hear the cries of Palestinian people. That's how it's done. So if they are hiding behind civilians, which whatever the fact is, if they are, it's done because they cannot support themselves better than Israelis can. Okay, it's not even a competition here, unless Hezbollah gets involved, of course. Mm-hmm. So that's my answer. But I want to hear your opinions about this.
I'll let Ivor go first.
Well, that makes sense. If you're saying that that Hamas is hiding behind its own people in hopes that Israel will not drop bombs on them because there's children there.
Yes.
But Israel's doing it anyway. And the Israeli that I interviewed on my show a week or so ago said that, you know, the news reports out of Israel are that they're actually giving warnings to Hamas of when and where they will strike, for the specific reason that women and children can then have time to leave. Yet Hamas is not telling its own people to leave. So Hamas is not passing on the word. So then Israel strikes anyway, and women and children die. That's Israel's narrative. I don't know what's true. It's so messy. Information is so messy in war.
So even if that's true, I mean, that doesn't change the fact that, both sides are guilty. Because like I said, Israel is much bigger. Israel is much bigger and stronger than Hamas can ever be without assistance, right? So have you seen that movie? Please remind me, what's that movie? Denzel Washington robbing the bank. Do you remember that? Like when he has a sick son and he's forced to rob the bank because no one. So he tries all the bureaucratic route. That's my point. So he goes and he's like, he's a working class. His son is dying, and he tries to get the loan out. No loan. Banks are pushing him away. Like, there's no way. These guys tried hard work, 24/7. Like,
Wait, so you're saying that Hamas has been trying all the peaceful routes, and their only option was to kill 1,000
Palestinians have been trying all the peaceful routes. Palestinians have been trying.
peaceful routes? What, to own Israeli land?
No, to get better living conditions in Gaza. As simple as that. They were
But they need to ask their own. They need to ask their own government. They elected Hamas.
Well, Hamas cannot do anything without Israelis. Israelis treated Palestinian and Hamas like, we don't care what you think. We don't care about your opinions. This is the point. This is the main, the purpose of this conversation, that when you are not heard, what do you do? Like that, I'm genuinely asking, like maybe somebody has an answer to that. So when you're not heard, okay, your Palestinians elected you because they had no other way. I mean, nobody was willing to protect them. No one. I mean, who was willing to protect them? Name one source. I'm open to options. Both of you, name one source.
Maybe a leader. Maybe I don't know how many parties ran for office back then, but there must have been some peaceful, non-terroristic, non-militant group other than Hamas who wanted to run for office and maybe mimic the way that America made itself great, because we ourselves used to be dirt poor when we first came to the United States, when it was a barren wasteland. We had nothing, and we built the most powerful nation in the world through free market economics. So maybe a free market economist could have been elected there in Gaza.
See,
possibly, but the issue is, I saw an Israeli state that actually there's the Oslo agreements that were in force, and nowhere in the Oslo agreement did it say, between the PLO and Israel, that Israel can't settle all these lands and just evict all the Palestinians. If the Palestinians don't like it, well, they should go back to the negotiating table and add that clause in where Israel's not allowed to take all your land. Wow, really? That's the stance. So I think there's really some realities here. President Putin surmised the whole situation fairly well, and Sergei Lavrov as well, saying that this was the US moving in, monopolizing the sort of diplomacy in the region, forwarding their agenda and doing a terrible job of it. As we've already said, there were these UN resolutions where the nations came together and saying, no, this is unacceptable. Palestine needs to be a recognized state. Israel, you've got to stop doing this. But the problem with the UN, as we've seen at the UN Security Council, where Russia and China put forward a resolution for an immediate ceasefire, evacuation of all hostages immediately, US, UK, and France vetoed that resolution. So it's now gone to the General Assembly. Even if it passes in the General Assembly, it's non-binding anyway. Israel will just do what it wants to do, as it has done for years. As I've said, even before I came to Russia, I remember, and Jeremy Corbyn got in a lot of trouble for bringing up Palestine and the blockade of Gaza. And there's been so many atrocities for years. So I don't think that any party that tried to sell itself on, let's say, a Mahatma Gandhi approach would have got very far when you're up against the PLO or Hamas.
Exactly.
These very,
like we said,
things. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And guess what? The one person that kind of wanted some type of peace, Arafat, they killed him. So every time there was a leader that Ivory is talking about, a peaceful approach, they were killed. Even in Egypt.
There's another point I'd like to make in recent events. Notice the timing of this. And again, I don't want to put a tinfoil hat on, but we had the PR calamity that was Biden trying to push through that funding for Ukraine and Matt Gaetz getting the Speaker of the House removed. It was clearly not going to happen. Nothing more for Ukraine. No way. Boom, Israel kicks off. And it's not so much that, oh, right, we'll just send all this money to Israel instead. It's, we'll have this much for Israel, and then we'll tag on some for Ukraine. It's like, so Raytheon and Lockheed can still profit. In fact, they'll profit even more.
Exactly.
Now, the wheels of the same machine are turning, but blood of other people is now being spilt. So it's not just the Slavs killing each other. Now we've got Arabs and Jews killing each other as well. So it's just money making for everyone.
Yeah, and I really believe that we're going to they want this conflict. America cannot. It's like a feeding mechanism. This country is on a machine hooked up on an air that's called war. There's no way they can function without this. So I know most Americans don't want to hear this, but as a third person perspective that's coming in, right? I think Simpson. See, you know how Simpson, the TV show predicts everything? Like they become
Yeah,
famous for predicting the future. There's an episode in Simpson, like where in this episode, the world has peace. Like world is in peace. And guess why? There is no America. So the United States is not present in the episode and there's peace. That has to say something to us, right? To Americans that we
that's not fair because before America there was the UK.
Oh, Britain. That's
Britain
true.
was there in the part down in
They were the
Pokemon.
world power before America came.
That's
Oh,
right.
and for people watching, Elizabeth's from the country of Georgia. I know people are going to say, "Where are you from?"
Oh yeah, I'm from Georgia, even though I'm American citizen. I'm a double citizen. But you know that's also something that I want to mention. You know, Israelis refer to their belief when they say that we belong in this on this land, right? It's ours. So coming from a country that got dissected, I don't know how many of you know Georgian history, but we are Asian people. Like Caucasian word comes from Georgia, by the way, the white Caucasian.
Oh,
Yeah, so that comes from Caucasian Mountains, which Georgia is right on it. So our land got dissected by Ottomans. I mean, you just look at the history of Georgia. It's constant war and protecting ourselves from everyone. So by that logic, I should knock on the door of Turks right now and say, "Give me my land back. I belong there." Like what? You know what I mean? Like it doesn't make sense. Like there are Christian churches in Trabzon from the old times. Like we belong there. Should I knock on Turks' land and say like, "Oh, once upon a time it was ours and you should just give it back to us because we need it." It doesn't work that way. You know, like there are certain
This
things.
gets back to Zionism, though. This is where all this Zionism comes from, and one of the sparking events was this raid by Israeli settlers, an attack on them, on Palestinians, in one of the most fundamental mosques in that region. I've forgotten the name, Al something, but there's then one of the oldest Christian churches in that area. Actually, Israel bombed one of the Catholic churches in the Gaza Strip recently, so you've got a whole mishmash. I'm going to go back to what I think Ivory said before about Janet Yellen, talking about we can afford 2 wars. Now that's lovely if Janet Yellen can afford 2 wars, but how many Americans can afford 2 wars, especially after they've just paid for Ukraine? I'm pretty sure that most everyday working Americans are like, no, I actually can't afford to now pay for Israel against who knows who, because is it going to be Syria? Is it going to be Lebanon and Hezbollah? Is it then also going to be Iran? And once we're finished with that, are we still going for China? So, Yellen, how much have you got in your back pocket for what? 3 wars? Is that how many you want to fund? I think it's actually the people that can most help the Palestinians, and not even just the Palestinians, this whole mess in the Middle East. Because without the US, Israel fails, just like Ukraine would fail within 2 weeks.
Yep.
Israel would be completely eradicated, presumably.
Wait, you're saying little Hamas would take down Israel?
No, not just Hamas.
Not alone. Not alone.
Iran would come to its rescue.
Yes, one country not mentioned much is Qatar. Now we've heard a lot about weapons coming from Ukraine being bought on the black market and sent to Hamas. Who done it? A big mystery. Not really. But who paid for it? Well, that's another question. And it's actually, the fingers tend to point towards Qatar. So Qatar's a very rich country, staying on the sidelines, but seemingly evidence might suggest, depending on where you're looking, that actually they may have funded these weapon acquisitions for Hamas. So you have this whole boiling point. My point is, if the US isn't throwing its weight around with 2 carrier groups now being assigned, they're the Royal Navy also being assigned into the Mediterranean to show, Putin now countering that, saying the Russian Air Force will patrol with Kinzhal missiles. Oh, by the way, your carrier groups are within range and you don't have a counter to those missiles. Watch it. So if the US pulls the plug and goes, actually, no, we can't afford these wars, or the US people rise up and say, no, not in our name, Ukraine, that's ended. Israel would have to capitulate and go, all right, guys, whoa. We're not going into Gaza. And no, we're not going to drop US JDAM bombs on Baptist hospitals, killing all the civilians that you warned to evacuate from the north to the south. And then evidence seems to suggest were intentionally bombed and killed. That wouldn't happen. So I'm not saying without the US, the world would be at peace, but certainly if the US people said, no, Janet Yellen, what are you talking about? We're not paying for it. Let's actually look after ourselves and our own economy. And maybe let's shut down some of these, 700 military bases around the world. Maybe let's start cost cutting and looking after number one. Maybe then we'd see a cessation of some of these hostilities.
Yeah, and I have to say kudos to Ivory for leaving Fox, because here's the thing: there was a video that I also uploaded on my Instagram, surface, where the soldier is asked, the simple soldier, American soldier, is asked that, oh, Rand Paul is the enemy of the nation because what he wants to do, guys, is pull you back from all these bases and to kind of pull you back, get you back home. And he starts to say, well, I think it's more unwise to stay where we are and kind of initiate wars with countries like Iran. And all of a sudden, the news are, oh, connection broke. Sorry. Can you?
That was Fox?
I don't think that was Fox, but I'm just saying that maybe it was. I don't know. But I'm just saying that major channels are just all in the same pot. You know what I mean? Like here is a quick decision by whoever, producer, whatever host, to cut the news because a soldier says it's unwise for us to fight, guys. Like it's not plausible. It's not good. And they're like, cut, right?
Wow.
Before we wrap up, I really want to say kind of, I think we are the best crew to talk about this. Biblical part of it, guys. Tinfoil heads, okay? No, not tinfoil head. I mean, Bible kind of says all those things, right? The attack on Holy Land, all of this. And even people who are completely not religious started talking about this. And this is where I'm like, what? So the things that we are seeing kind of feels like the end of times, right? So you had the COVID, you had all this like pandemic, which Bible says they starts there. And then, constant conflict. And then boom, even Kim Iverson had a priest in the show to maybe describe why is it that we are seeing so many signs towards like biblical signs to the end of the world. And if, let's say, play out this scenario that this is part of that time where the end is going to come, right? There is this prophecy that one person will bring the peace, and he will rule over 3 nations. So 3 nations under the peace, and then he will give the world the peace for 3 years only. And then he will turn on his own policies and the peace, and he declares that either you worship me and what I have to say, or there will be wars, right? So the question I have to you, if this is remotely true, who do you think from the pool of people that we have can pull this off? Who is that person? Like, is that person even visible right now because I've been thinking about this, right? Like, is it coming from the West? And who's, like, certainly not Biden? Is it Chinese leader? Is it Putin? Like, who do you think could pull off such a miracle to bring peace in the Middle East?
Well, I think it probably would be someone from the United States, because the US is just so powerful and has been for so long that it's just hard to believe that someone else would topple America and rule over them and other countries to create peace. So I think it'd be America ruling, whoever succeeds Biden it's likely that there's going to be someone radical who comes after Biden. Unfortunately, I think that's going to be the case. And then that person would rule over 3 nations, create peace, and then their ego would get the best of them, as they always do, and then turn. So that's my prediction.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually more thinking about it. It wouldn't be Xi. It wouldn't be Putin, I don't think, because, well, both Xi and Putin already rule over numerous nations. We got the Russian Federation, and then we have China with all its provinces.
Mm-hmm.
The US, you could say, well, that's the same. That's lots of countries united in the United States. But I don't think the US is the power that it was or thought it was. So I don't think it actually has that meaningful control yet to do that, unless it was somebody who was saying, all right, the US isn't going to foment wars everywhere else. That could be one thing. But as I've said, even France in Africa has caused problems. And we've seen the Africans rise up against it. So is it the Middle East? Maybe. I would say that's probably the easiest region where you could perhaps control 3, well, let's call them nations, but I wouldn't even limit it to just nations. 3 maybe peoples or spheres or cultures that then stop warring. I'd say that's probably it. And I would probably say that it's probably not a figure that we see yet. I don't think it's going to be Trump in the US, honestly. Many people
I doubt that our elections are even legit anymore. I doubt that our vote counts, and that's why I'm saying, sadly, it's probably going to be someone radical after Biden who's installed. I hope I'm wrong. I pray I'm wrong.
But not someone that I could probably name and say this would be the person to do it in this case. So I have heard those, and I've heard an Indian guy recognize me at an airport, and he started telling me about I can't remember the religion that the prophecy came from. He was talking
Hindu?
about a great Israel that
Close.
well, it took over parts of Syria. With the oil and then the gas, and he was talking about Israel expanding to become this state, and he was saying that's where the Antichrist would come from. And the one thing about that rang in my head, I was like, so that's why the US has been sitting on that oil in Syria for all these years, siphoning off that wealth, just waiting for the time when Israel then expands out and creates this great Israel state. That's the one piece of this sort of mystic prophecy that I was like, well, that could kind of make sense. But otherwise, I don't buy into much of that. The one thing I'm hoping, the one prophecy that I hope doesn't come to pass is Zhirinovsky. 10 years ago, he made some eerie predictions about Ukraine.
Oh my gosh, I know what you're talking about. Yes, he predicted this war.
He said it was 19 years ago, and he talked about Israel and whether it would exist. And he said, you'll see in 20 years' time. So that gives us another year left. And he talked about the collapse of Israel and then moving into Russian territory. He went into far more detail, but then the sort of hypothesis is that this is what's behind the depopularization of Ukraine now. And then I already talked about the Ukrainian Zionism. So we have some similarities in these thinking of like a homeland. Zhirinovsky was of the opinion that Israel will move to presumably Ukraine or the states that are formerly Ukraine and become part of the Russian Federation and thus benefit from the protection and modern weapon systems of Russia, which has a future. Zhirinovsky believes they won't go to America because it's too full of African Americans, Latinos, said the culture's dead, America has no future, that Russia would be the place.
America's always been a melting pot.
Not to this level, but because we are seeing a ton of immigrants, not to this level. Like, I'm sorry, but America has crashed in terms of immigration. Like, it's incredible what's happening to the borders right now. So I do see your point in this, nothing would surprise me anymore, because here's the thing: lots of American elites were in cahoots with Hitler. We know the Union Bank, and they funded Hitler. So why is that? Because the Zionists on top, right? If we really want to get to the core, they always believed in some type of pure nation or pure blood, or I don't know. It's their belief, not mine. So don't blame me for it. I'm just a messenger. They always believed in this type of like nation that has to be some type of either pure or something. And what they're doing in America right now, they are flooding the country with multiple different nations. That's not what they believe in at all. So why are they doing this? Unless their plans are to move the censure somewhere else. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I can't speak too much for Zhirinovsky. People familiar with his work, that was something that's come to pass. But alas, yeah. I'm afraid I'm about to run out of time.
Yeah, we I think are pretty much there too. So thank you, Mike, so much. Always so interesting to get your perspective. Stay safe in the front lines. And yeah, it was a good discussion. I think we've touched like 7 different issues in like 1 hour, which is good. Yeah. Always good. Yes.
Thanks so much, Mike. Great talking to you.
Pleasure. Thank you both.
All right.